Oh, shoot. Yeah. So, we did receive several other questions. I thought,
Oh,
it would be helpful for us to kind of talk through those
okay.
For folks that go back to the recording. So, can you talk a little bit about how long grief in mourning takes typically?
Yes, a good point. And that is a common question. So grief doesn't have a time frame that is just, this is how long you have to take to mourn, and then you need to move on and it should be over. It's really much more of a gradual process. And because grief and loss can also trigger other feelings or trauma, or there could be trauma involved in the reason why there was the loss to begin with, typically it can take a long time for people in managing their feelings of sadness and grief and that period of mourning. And what may start out as much more, there's a poem out there that talks about grief and feeling shipwrecked, in that in some levels at the beginning of that loss, all you can do is just hang on to whatever's floating around you for support, while the waves, and I like this image of that grief is like waves that might sometimes just overtake you, and it can feel really overwhelming. And that's for adults and adolescents and children. And so this writing goes on to talk about, over time, there are still waves, but they don't come as frequently and you don't feel as overwhelmed by them. And that eventually those waves might come during things like holidays, or a certain moment, or a certain smell, or a certain memory can trigger those waves, but they start getting less frequent. And that eventually you will bear the scars of that loss and grief, but you will have healed in some way enough to be able to move on, not move on, but manage life with those scars. And yeah, I don't want to say move on, because I think a lot of people who experience grief, and children included, feel like this grief, it's almost sacrilegious to move on, because it doesn't, it's almost disrespectful to the person that was lost, not to go on to move on with my life without them. So that loss and grief is often a part of us and helps shape who we are. And it's hard when children are experiencing that, because it does stay with them and shape who they are, as it does all of us. But when we talk about the duration of grief, we really do hope, and we watch, especially with children, that at some point they are able to start to get back to a routine. Oftentimes, depending on the age of the child, they may not even recognize the loss as a permanent loss and be confused about why this adult may not be in their lives anymore. And so it may also, grief might be something that takes a while, because the child's still grasping what it means, that loss means. So when people ask how long does it take, it really is dependent on the situation. And there's complexities to grief. There's different kinds of grief based on knowing that someone you love is going to be passing away soon, and kind of preparing for that, versus an abrupt traumatic death, or divorce, or breakup where it was unexpected. And those take on different forms, and hence take different roles in people's lives in terms of their mourning period.
Good night. You kind of touched on this next question. Hopefully you can elaborate a little bit more. So this person said, I'd like to learn a little bit more about how to help my children deal with the loss of their father.
Mm-hmm.
He did not pass away, but he left them.
Yeah.
So that different kind of loss.
Right. Right. And it's important to remember that there are different kinds of loss. And for children, sometimes as adults, we take for granted what is a loss for a child. So definitely a caregiver that a child's been attached to who abruptly leaves, and especially when it's maybe an adult in their lives, can cause a lot of grief. I might also suggest that there are other kinds of losses that maybe adults overlook, like loss of a friend, especially when children move, loss of the familiar when they move schools and their friend group changes. There are certainly losses related to moving and being further from family or friends or neighbors. Loss of a pet is a big deal, not just for kids, but for adults too. So sometimes there's losses and then grief that occurs that we, as adults, I think in the whirlwind of our lives, we overlook because it doesn't seem as significant to us. So it is important to be aware of different kinds of loss, such as in this case, a father who left the home. And so the question being, how do I help my child deal with that? That's really important, that the remaining adults in the child's life deal with all of the stuff, anger, frustration, rage, abandonment, sadness, all those feelings that the remaining adults feel about this dad leaving. They need to make sure they're taking care of that for themselves, because children will absolutely see it. They'll feel it. They'll see it. They'll hear all the negative. They'll sense the negativity, the anger. They may feel like it's directed at them. So just like getting on a plane, adults need to put the oxygen mask on first and take care of your own need to breathe in your brain about, and your emotions about what this loss means to you. And then before you can really help your child deal with it, because if you're not stable and settled and at a place where you can even talk about it without just rage, your child is going to be left feeling insecure about where they're at, what's happening, maybe not safe. And then it's sometimes hard because the adults in these situations often feel very strong emotions, that those strong emotions aren't also projected onto the child. And unfortunately, I've seen sometimes where that happens, where the remaining parent is just so angry and unintentionally is focusing then on who's left, which is the child, and maybe characteristics that remind them of the father, or behaviors that remind them of just like your father. So I would caution parents and families when these kind of losses occur to make sure that adults and children in the home are getting some help and support, and using a lot of circles of support to help everybody deal with that. I hope that's helpful in terms of, because this is a very complex issue when children experience the loss of a parent, a primary caregiver.
So do you have any, if we maybe do like a hypothetical, let's say that child is really missing their dad, and he or she shares that with the mom. How would you recommend mom, after as you said, taking care of themselves first, but are there tips, ways that parents can kind of help guide kids through their emotions, because those are big emotions and they don't know what to do with them so often?
Right. Yeah. I think it's really important that when children then bring those things up, and then it's, again, the parent doing what they need to do to take care of themselves as well. But when children bring that up, it does take some balance in the parent's response, trying to do their best not to project their own feelings or skew the information that their child is hearing. It's important to listen, just listen to what the child has to say, really carefully, listening to what they're thinking, what their needs are, what the feelings are behind what's being shared. And it's important to also listen for things like misinformation or misconceptions and underlying fears or concerns, because sometimes in those cases, children are blaming themselves. And so really kind of getting a sense for where your child is at. It's almost kind of assessing where your child is at as well as you're listening to them. And then I think adults need to just talk honestly, but simply. So just clear, age appropriate information. Sometimes if you withhold too much information, they're going to get really anxious about what's happening next, what's going to happen with this, what's going to happen with that. And so it takes some discretion to think through what your child can handle, how much information to give them, and maybe in small increments, as opposed to just overwhelming them with, oh my gosh, and then this, and then this, and this, and this, and this. So maybe thinking through what to tell them in that moment in small, chewable bites. And then I had to learn not to use so many words when talking to my children when they were younger, when it was a big, serious issue, but to try to give them a simple explanation and then pause and listen and let their little brains kind of capture that information. And then oftentimes they just, okay, and took off. And I thought, oh, okay, I had so much more I would have said, but then almost inevitably they would come back, and then when they were ready, ask the next question or ask you to repeat what was stated. So children you have to kind of follow their cues a little bit about what they're willing to hear and ready to hear. So I would suggest that parents also think through that. And then like starting out just simple statements like something very bad or something very sad has happened and I need to tell you about it, or we don't have all the answers right now, but I can let you know when I know more, or we can talk more later when you're ready to, or even expressing your own feelings of loss. Like, I am just feeling really sad about this too. I'm sad as well. And then offering for your children, like, do you have questions about what's happening, so that they do get the chance to just inquire and you get a chance to kind of see where they're at.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't that kind of give them, by asking them or allowing them to ask questions, it kind of gives them a part of the control, if you will?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Pam. Yeah, because these kind of situations, children definitely don't feel in control, and they aren't. Let's be honest. Kids aren't in control when all these kind of big things happen. But we can give them back some control about, first of all, how they respond to it. That's a big thing. And that's, I mean, adults need to learn that, is that, okay, I can't control what's happening, but I can control my response to it, and then modeling that for a child. And then giving them those opportunities to make even those small decisions, like taking control by being able to ask questions, being able to hear answers, being able to inquire further or explore things. This is also a good time to give children kind of tasks, like if this is something about a loss of someone close to them, and including them in the kind of the ceremony or giving them a job to do can make them feel they have some control and purpose. And I'm going to be the grandson that brings the flowers to the cemetery, or I'm going to show grandma that I love her by drawing her a picture to put in the memorial for her, or whatever that might be. So I agree very much, Pam. I think that's a really good point, that giving children control is very important.
Excellent. Good stuff. Good stuff. Let's see here. There was another question. I honestly got a little bit lost, but the question was a little bit different in that this parent's mother, so it would be the child's grandparent, has a terminal illness. And we talked a little bit about, how all of the different kinds of losses, but do you have any thoughts, any tips for parents or caregivers who have children who are kind of in that same scenario, how they can best kind of work through this very difficult situation, as the person with the terminal illness,
Yeah.
their health is declining.
Yeah. I think when I read that question, I think it was maybe a grandmother to the child, perhaps that was in hospice care. And so that's an indication that things are happening. There's going to be some big change about to occur. And so the opportunity is that people and loved ones can kind of prepare themselves and have the opportunity to, as best they can, maybe either make amends or say their goodbyes or resolve any family things or tension that's been going on. And so bringing children into a situation like that, again, it's really important that the adults around them are able to be a role model about how they're managing their own big emotions. And then this is a great opportunity to give those chewable bites to children to prepare them that grandma, has heard from the doctor that she is going to die, and we don't know when, but her sickness is taking over. And again, putting that in words that your child would understand. And again, using your family's faith culture to as you would normally. In my family, we would talk about going to heaven, and other families have other philosophies or other spiritual beliefs about that. And so incorporating your family culture and your faith into those conversations is a good opportunity at that point to bring your child into that. And then allowing them there's some great ways to memorialize the person that is about to die or is dying. And so allowing your child to draw the loved one a card and present it to them, or preparing them before you go to a visit. Like, okay, do you want to see grandma? It looks like this may be the last time before she goes to heaven. Might be a way it's explained to a child. And she's going to be in a room, and she'll be in a bed, like explaining the environment so the child can prepare themselves for what's about to happen. And not going too heavy on the child all at once, but again, those kind of little bits of information. And then you can give grandma your card that you made. And then there's also great opportunities to memorialize and some real creative ideas that families have had about even making like plaster hands of their loved one, or I know with even not just the death, but loss in general. I've done things with children where we used balloons and wrote a note and kind of sent it up as kind of my last, because maybe they weren't able to say their goodbyes. So, or floating it in water, or, in a creek or something. So there's some, if you go online, there's lots of creative, healthy ideas about how to memorialize a person too. And families tend to need that for just a way to mark this really significant moment in a person's life, because this child is going to remember that moment pretty much for the rest of their lives. Mm-hmm. So I know that's sometimes a lot of pressure on parents, but being genuine and sharing with them that you are also sad and what your feelings are about grandma dying and being in hospice with the child, and again, chewable bites, not overwhelming them with a flood of your own emotions, helps them also realize that this is a normal response to this very sad event. So those are just some thoughts on that.
Very good. Very good. Okay. And you've really covered the only other question that we had received in advance is, we talked about how do you cope with grief and loss, and you've given us a lot of good specific ideas. Is there anything else, any other tidbits of information that that you think families would really benefit from?
I was just thinking as we were talking tonight that this is a topic that's going to affect every single one of us. And I don't know that we adequately prepare for it. Like, it's inevitable. You're going to experience loss. And I wonder if just families might want to think through utilizing resources to talk to children about loss before it's there, before it happens, especially, for the losses that you can't prepare for. Because I think it's important for that family network around a child and their caregivers can prepare them for what's unfortunately some of the inevitabilities of life, with tools and resources that they can use. So there's lots of great children's books and great websites that will direct you to children's books that talk about death and loss. When those things happen, perhaps not within the immediate circle of the family, but maybe, at school, a friend's grandfather died, and using those opportunities to talk about some of those losses ahead of time. And then like we want for all mental health and prevention, which is to teach your children good, healthy coping skills. And I love how Taylor talked earlier about using fitness and walking as a way to cope with those kind of big feelings. So helping children prepare for big feelings in their lives before they're hit with them, I think is really, as we've been talking, I was just thinking about that and just the inevitability that this is something we will all deal with at some point. And some of us do, some of us weather it. I wouldn't say do well with it. I'd say some of us weather it and survive it okay, because you survive. And others do not. And so we want every child to be successful in overcoming the adversity and scars that will happen in life.
Yeah, I think that is a great point. And keying in to, it kind of goes back to, when your kids come home from school and what they're telling you happened during the day, listening for those teachable moments. Although it's a lot easier said than done.
Yeah.
I remember when I was a really, really tired mom.
Yeah.
And you're just like, I've got to cook and I've got to do laundry, and then you've got to go to bed. But the example of a grandparent, of a friend from school, those types of things, when you hear those and put two and two together, it's just giving them more tools to cope, to work through those tough times. I think that's a great point to bring up.
And Pam, I just want to add, as you mentioned it, we need to teach those positive coping skills now, because letting your child drown in their sadness and grief by being on a screen constantly. And people do that. Adults do this. Rather than deal with the loss, I'm just going to be on my phone constantly because it distracts me. It's soothing. It's soothing me. I'm looking at junk, but it's soothing me. Or overeating. And this is one for me, is like soothing myself through food. We know that some people soothe themselves through alcohol and drugs because it deadens the pain. So helping your child with those positive coping skills and those teachable opportunities like you talked about, as opposed to that gravitation toward things that may temporarily deaden the pain or distract from the pain, because those lessons now are going to be so incredibly important when they experience the inevitabilities of loss and grief when they're older, and we want them to choose a path that's healthy and is going to help them be resilient adults. And yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned the teachable moments, because yes, it's harder than just letting a kid watch Netflix and binge on it while the parent gets themselves together, because you're exhausted. But if you take if you invest your time now in that, it's going to pay off later. I assure you it will. Yeah.
Yeah. And once again, kudos to you, Taylor, because you already have identified that and you're implementing that in your everyday everyday life. So kudos to you. And like Karen said, you know, whenever you have those opportunities to share and teach your kids as they get older, that will just make it even better. So I just want to say that again to you, Taylor, because that's awesome. Awesome. Well, and I don't see any other questions right now. So
Okay.
Taylor, do you have any other questions that our discussion has brought up that we could answer for you?
I don't think so. I think it was pretty educational.
Oh, great. I'm glad.
Well, very good. Well, thank you so much. And you know, you mentioned substance use. Next month's real world parenting topic of the month for May will be substance use. Unfortunately, we know a lot of kids who are struggling with mental health issues also use substances. And it kind of becomes a chicken and an egg, you know, the substance use. I don't know how you would put it,
using the substance to help soothe the symptoms of their mental health problem, and then
Thank you. Yes.
their mental health, or the use of substances itself create a mental health problem because of the child and youth's developing brain. So yeah, it's really kind of a circular problem, a downward spiral, so to speak.
Yes. So during the month of May, check out the Facebook page of Family Service and Guidance Center. We'll have one different video each week for the first 3 weeks. And then we'll have the opportunity to visit with Dana Schwartz and get questions answered about substance use, our substance use treatment, and how we can help families in the community. So once again, on behalf of all of us at Family Service and Guidance Center, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.